Imagine having $1 million just sitting in your bank account on the exact day you retire.
Right, the dream.
Yeah. I mean, you've done everything society told you to do.
Yeah.
You saved, you invested, you definitely delayed gratification for decades.
Mm-hmm.
But underneath all that, underneath that massive achievement,
Mm-hmm.
there is this totally terrifying mathematical reality,
Yeah.
which is if you withdraw just a fraction too much in year one, or if the market happens to stumble in your first few months of freedom,
Oh, yeah.
you are mathematically guaranteed to be entirely broke by the time you're 82.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate financial paradox.
Exactly.
You have more money than you have ever had in your entire life, and yet you've literally never been more vulnerable to forces that are completely outside of your control.
Right. And if you're listening to this deep dive right now, you are probably trying to figure out how to navigate that exact scenario right without spending your golden years in a state of just constant financial panic.
Because it's stressful. I mean, planning for retirement often feels like you're being asked to somehow predict the future of the global economy.
Yeah, and forecast your own lifespan while you're at it.
Exactly. And then somehow build a bulletproof shield out of a pile of savings.
Well, we actually have source material today that attempts to offer a bit of a shortcut through that anxiety. We are looking at a framework that's really designed to give you a mathematical baseline for survival. It's
Yeah.
famously known as the 4% rule of retirement withdrawals.
And it serves as a pretty fascinating piece of financial architecture, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it attempts to put a very rigid, predictable formula over something as utterly chaotic as the global stock market and, human longevity.
Right. So our goal today is to kind of demystify this massive cornerstone of retirement planning. We really want you to walk away understanding the mechanics underneath the rule, the hidden dangers it's trying to protect you from, and most importantly, why blindly following a percentage can actually be a complete recipe for disaster.
Yes.
We're going to look at the actual engine driving this math. Okay, let's unpack this. Where did this magic number actually come from? Because 4% sounds, well, awfully arbitrary.
It does. And the foundation of this rule, it requires us to untangle a bit of financial history first,
Okay.
because people often conflate two very different pieces of research here. So the origin actually goes back to 1994 to this aerospace engineer turned financial planner named William Bengen.
An aerospace engineer. Wow.
Yeah, an analytical mind. And then a few years later, in 1998, three finance professors at Trinity University published a totally separate paper.
Right, the famous Trinity study.
Exactly, which built upon Bengen's work. But Bengen is really the architect here.
So he's the one who actually established the 4% baseline.
He is, yeah. Bengen recognized that prior to his 1994 paper, financial advisors were giving clients some incredibly dangerous advice.
Like what?
Well, advisors would look at the historical average return of the stock market. So let's say it averaged 7% a year over a century.
Okay, sure.
And they'd tell clients, hey, just withdraw 7% a year and you'll literally never touch your principal.
Oh, wow. But an average is just like a mathematical smoothing of wild extremes, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the market doesn't neatly hand you 7% on January 1st every single year.
Not at all.
Sometimes it drops 20% in a week.
Exactly. And Bengen saw the massive flaw in relying on those averages. So he decided to stress test withdrawal rates against actual historical market conditions.
Right.
He looked at data spanning back decades, analyzing specific 30-year periods, and he asked a really brilliant question. What is the absolute worst case scenario a retiree could have faced in modern history?
So he was basically looking at people who retired at the absolute worst possible moments.
Right. He modeled portfolios for hypothetical individuals retiring in, say, October 1929.
Oh, man, right on the eve of the Great Depression.
Exactly. And he modeled people retiring in 1968, stepping right into a massive period of economic stagnation and crippling inflation in the 1970s. Yeah, he wanted to find a sustainable withdrawal rate. Basically, a percentage a retiree could take out every single year that would have survived even those apocalyptic economic periods without the portfolio running totally dry before that 30-year mark.
So he wasn't looking for a strategy to make you incredibly wealthy in retirement. He was looking for the mathematical floor of survival during a literal economic disaster.
That's exactly it. And through that exhaustive historical analysis, testing different withdrawal rates against the worst periods of the 20th century, He concluded that an initial withdrawal rate of 4% was basically the ceiling of safety.
Okay.
Historically speaking, drawing down 4% initially, followed by some specific mechanical adjustments, sustained a retiree's portfolio through every single 30-year period he tested.
Okay, I want to make sure we're giving you, the listener, a really concrete visualization of this. Because, percentages can feel so abstract until they actually hit your bank account.
Oh, totally.
So let's use the $1 million portfolio from our sources. You hit day one of retirement, you've got the $1 million. How does the math actually commence?
So step one is the initial calculation, and it's actually entirely straightforward. You just take 4% of your total retirement savings on the very first day you retire.
Okay, so for that $1 million portfolio, 4% establishes your baseline income for year one, meaning you withdraw $40,000.
$40,000, exactly.
$40,000. That is your salary for your first year of freedom. And, on the surface, that sounds like a very clean, simple system.
It does.
But anyone who has bought groceries over the last few years knows that the cost of living absolutely refuses to sit still. $40,000 30 years from now might barely cover, I don't know, a year of basic utilities and property taxes.
Exactly. Inflation is brutal.
Right. So how does this rule account for that erosion of purchasing power? Because I'm assuming this isn't like an ATM where you just hit the $40,000 button every January for the rest of your life.
Oh, definitely not. But that is actually a widespread misconception that ruins a lot of financial plans. You do not hit the same button on the ATM, and you also do not calculate 4% of whatever balance is left in your portfolio in year two.
Oh, wait, really?
Yeah, the 4% figure is only utilized exactly once on day one of year one.
Okay, that is a massive distinction. So the 4% literally goes away after the very first calculation.
It does. What's fascinating here is the mechanism designed to protect your lifestyle moving forward. Every subsequent year after year one, you completely ignore the percentage.
Okay.
Instead, you take the actual dollar amount you withdrew the previous year, and you adjust it upward by the inflation rate.
Ah, okay, let's put the math into motion so we can really see that mechanism working.
Sure. Our sources lay out a very clear timeline for this.
So
you took out $40,000 in year one, right? Let's say the inflation rate going into year two is a relatively standard, say, 2%. You need to increase your withdrawal to match that rising cost of living. So you just add 2% to your $40,000. Your withdrawal in year two becomes $40,800.
Okay, got it. And then in year three, if inflation suddenly jumps to 5%, I take that $40,800 and add another 5% to it.
Exactly.
So the actual value of my portfolio no longer dictates my withdrawal amount. The macroeconomic inflation rate dictates my raise.
Yeah, and this adjustment is the hinge upon which the entire rule operates. I mean, without it, if you were relying on a flat $40,000, your actual purchasing power would be just devastated by year 20.
Totally.
The rule is really designed to ensure you can buy the exact same basket of goods in year 30 that you could afford in year one, regardless of what the literal price tags say.
But wait, the math creates an incredible tension here.
How so?
Well, if we start with $40,000 and we let inflation dictate compounding raises every single year for 3 decades, I mean, that requires a massive amount of capital. $1 million sitting in a savings account earning minimal interest is going to get drained incredibly fast by those escalating withdrawals.
Oh, absolutely.
There has to be a pretty powerful engine under the hood of this strategy to fund those raises, right?
Yeah. And this brings us to the third crucial component of Bengen's research and the subsequent Trinity study, which is the portfolio composition itself.
Okay.
Because the rule completely fails if the money is just parked in a mattress or some low-yield savings account. The underlying assumption is that the portfolio is heavily invested in a growth engine.
Okay, so what does that engine look like mathematically?
The sources indicate the rule assumes a diversified portfolio with a surprisingly aggressive mix for a retiree, actually. It requires holding 50 to 75% of the total value in equities. So stocks with the remainder in stable bonds.
Wait, keeping up to 75% of your life savings in the stock market while you are actively retired? That feels super counterintuitive.
It does, right.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of conditioned to think that retirement means moving everything into safe assets to protect it.
Well, you've hit on the fundamental tension of retirement planning right there. You are terrified of stock market volatility, obviously, but you're also terrified of running out of money.
Right.
Stocks provide the growth potential that is absolutely necessary to outpace decades of compounding inflation. And then bonds provide a shock absorber for the years when the stock market inevitably contracts.
But the stock market is a super chaotic environment. Let's say I build my portfolio at 60% stocks and 40% bonds on the exact day I retire.
Okay.
A few years go by, we hit a massive bull market, tech stocks explode, and suddenly my equity holdings have grown so much that they make up 85% of my portfolio's value.
Right.
But the rule requires a specific balance. How do I manage that shifting terrain?
Well, that introduces the necessity of rebalancing, which is kind of akin to driving a manual transmission car up a constantly changing landscape.
Right.
You cannot just leave it in gear and hope for the best. When your stocks go on a massive run and grow to 85% of your portfolio, you are suddenly carrying vastly more risk than the 4% rule actually accounts for.
Yeah. Because a sudden market crash at that exact moment would obliterate your life savings.
Exactly.
So I have to actively downshift. I have to sell off the winning stocks to bring my balance back down to 60% and use that cash to buy more bonds.
You are mechanically forcing yourself to buy low and sell high. By trimming the assets that have grown disproportionately and purchasing the assets that have lagged, you continuously reset your risk profile.
Interesting.
Yeah, it keeps your portfolio aligned with the historical data that proves the 4% rule actually works in the first place.
Okay, I want to pause here because we really need to talk about the hidden danger lurking underneath all this math. We briefly touched on the danger of relying on averages, but there is a specific mechanism that destroys retirement accounts. And it's the entire reason Bengen's required asset allocation matters so much.
Oh, yes.
We have to talk about sequence of return risk.
That is the silent killer of retirement plans. It really is a concept that is almost entirely invisible while you are saving for retirement, but it becomes completely catastrophic the moment you actually start withdrawing.
Right, so I want to illustrate this for the listener. Imagine two different people, person A and person B.
Okay.
Both retire with exactly $1 million. Both use the 4% rule, taking out $40,000 adjusted for inflation over 30 years. Both experience the exact same average market return of 6% over their entire 30-year retirement.
Sounds identical so far.
Right. But person A retires into a booming market. Their portfolio grows rapidly in the first 5 years, and the market crashes 20 years later. Person B retires the year before a massive global recession. Their portfolio takes a huge hit in the first 5 years, but the market booms 20 years later.
The opposite scenario.
Exactly. Person A dies with $3 million left in the bank. Person B goes entirely broke by year 17.
Wow.
The exact same average returns over 30 years, but entirely different outcomes. Why does the timing of the bad years dictate survival so completely?
It's because of the destructive nature of withdrawing funds during a market contraction.
Right.
When person B experiences a market crash in year one, their $1 million portfolio might suddenly drop to, say, $800,000.
Right.
But the 4% rule dictates they still withdraw their $40,000 living expense.
So they are essentially selling their stock shares at a massive discount just to buy groceries.
Exactly. And that capital is permanently gone. When the market inevitably recovers in year 4 or 5, person B has significantly fewer shares participating in that recovery.
Wow.
They have permanently impaired the compounding engine of their portfolio. Sequence of return risk dictates that a severe market downturn in the first 5 to 7 years of retirement is exponentially more dangerous than a crash in, say, year 20.
Because in year 20, you've already had 2 decades of compounding growth to build a fortress around your principal. A crash hurts, obviously, but it doesn't break the math.
This is exactly why the rigid asset allocation and bond buffer exist. In those early, dangerous years of a market crash, the bonds act as your spending reserve. They allow you to leave your decimated stock shares alone so they can eventually recover.
Okay, the mechanics of this rule are honestly brilliant. Bengen basically constructed a mathematical bunker designed to survive inflation, market crashes, and the absolute terror of early sequence risk.
He really did.
It provides a straightforward guideline, and historically, it offers genuine sustainability. It's incredibly clear why this became the gold standard of financial planning. But here's where it gets really interesting.
The transition from historical modeling to real-world application.
Yes, because a strict mathematical rule is beautiful on a spreadsheet, but human beings do not live on spreadsheets. And the future of the global economy has literally never felt obligated to repeat the past.
Very true.
The source material outlines some pretty profound limitations to this framework. We have to do a reality check on where the math actually breaks down.
So the first major vulnerability we must confront is the reliance on historical market conditions. I mean, Bengen analyzed the 20th century, he looked at the Great Depression, he looked at the 1970s.
Right.
But looking backward assumes that the fundamental mechanics of the economy will remain, well, somewhat consistent.
So we are essentially projecting past behavior onto future unprecedented circumstances.
Exactly. Consider the bond market, for instance. For much of the 20th century, bonds provided a very reliable substantive yield. They were a powerful shock absorber that generated real income.
Yeah.
But in recent modern history, we've seen periods where bond yields were near zero, or where inflation massively outpaced bond returns. If the macroeconomic environment shifts to a place where both stocks and bonds perform poorly simultaneously for an extended period, the safety net of the 4% rule could be seriously compromised.
Which flows perfectly into the danger of extreme inflation.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about adjusting our withdrawals for the cost of living. The math assumes we just add a few percent every year.
Right.
But we know from looking at the 1970s or even recent global events that inflation doesn't always play nice.
No, it doesn't. A period of hyperinflation or just sustained high inflation creates a really severe mathematical trap. If inflation spikes to 8, 9, or 10% for several consecutive years, your withdrawal amounts have to skyrocket just to maintain your baseline standard of living.
Right. If my $40,000 withdrawal suddenly has to become $55,000 just to keep the lights on and buy the same exact food, I am pulling massive chunks of capital out of the portfolio.
You are draining the principal at an accelerated rate. High inflation forces you to basically devour the engine that is supposed to be generating your future growth.
Yeah.
And if you combine a period of high inflation with a stagnant stock market, which, by the way, often happen together.
Right. Stagflation.
Yeah, you're pulling large amounts of money out of a shrinking pool. The portfolio may actually never recover from that dual assault.
It is a terrifying vulnerability. But there's another vulnerability the text brings up that has absolutely nothing to do with the stock market and everything to do with medical science.
Ah, yes.
We need to talk about longevity. The entire premise of the Trinity study and Bengen's research was analyzing 30-year retirement periods.
Which, to be fair, was a very reasonable assumption in 1994. I mean, if you retired at 65, planning for your portfolio to survive until you were 95 provided a very comfortable margin of safety for the vast majority of the population.
Sure. But what happens if you retire at 60 and due to modern medicine you live to be 98?
Well, the mathematical models simply run out. The historical data proved the portfolio survives for 3 decades. It offered absolutely zero guarantees about a 4th decade. If you rigidly adhere to the 4% rule, consistently taking your inflation-adjusted raises every year, you risk draining the account completely if you experience extraordinary longevity.
So you basically outlive the math. Which means you can't just blindly follow the ATM algorithm. As you realize you might live significantly past that 30-year window, you might have to consciously lower your standard of living in your 80s just to stretch the remaining fuel.
Yeah, you're forced to abandon the rigid structure of the rule and adopt a highly dynamic defensive posture.
This perfectly illustrates the final and perhaps most human limitation we need to discuss: behavioral flexibility. Because the schematics of the 4% rule demand a very specific lifestyle. A perfectly smooth, predictable, slightly upward sloping line of spending.
Right.
Year 1 is 40,000, year 2 is 40,800, and so on. But human desires and human aging completely reject that straight line.
They really do. The reality of retirement spending is often described by economists as a spending smile. It's a curve, not a line.
Right, the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years.
Precisely. In the early years of retirement, the go-go years, people generally want to spend heavily. They have their health, they have free time, and they want to travel or buy the RV or remodel the house.
Yeah, live it up a bit.
Right. Their actual spending needs might represent a 6 or 7% withdrawal rate in those first few years.
But the 4% rule absolutely forbids taking 6% in year 1. It demands you restrict your travel dreams to fit the formula.
Exactly. And conversely, as retirees enter their mid-70s and 80s, the slow-go years, their day-to-day spending often drops significantly. They travel less, they stay closer to home, their withdrawal needs might naturally drop to 2 or 3%.
Makes sense.
And finally, in the late stages of life, spending might spike again due to intensive healthcare or assisted living costs.
So the formula completely ignores the reality of how we actually want to live our lives.
Yeah.
It treats your personal economy as just like a rigid macroeconomic equation.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, every single limitation we've discussed points to the danger of treating a mathematical theory as an unbreakable law. The market is unpredictable, inflation is totally volatile, your lifespan is a mystery, and your personal desires are going to change drastically over 30 years.
So what does this all actually mean for you listening right now? We've explored the historical origins, we've walked through the mechanics of inflation adjustments, we've looked at the underlying portfolio engine and the danger of sequence of return risk, and we've reality checked the human and economic vulnerabilities. Where does that leave your financial plan?
I think it leaves you with a profound understanding of a powerful tool. The source material makes it really clear. The 4% rule is not a guarantee, but it is an exceptional compass.
The compass, I like that.
It rescues you from staring blindly into the fog of retirement. It provides a historically tested, mathematically sound baseline to actually begin your planning.
It basically gives you the structural framework, but it doesn't pour the concrete.
Perfectly said. The conclusion from the research really emphasizes that individual circumstances dictate success. You cannot automate this process.
Right.
The texts advise utilizing this framework in conjunction with a financial advisor, someone who actually understands the mathematical floor Bengen established, but who can help you dynamically adjust your withdrawal rate based on current market valuations, your shifting health, and your own personal spending smile.
So you use the math to build the foundation, but you use human judgment to navigate the actual storms.
Exactly. It requires active management, continuous rebalancing, and a willingness to compromise when the economic weather inevitably turns against you.
Well, we've journeyed from the terrifying reality of early sequence risk to the historical bunkers built by Bengen, and finally to the human realities that require us all to be flexible. You now have the knowledge of the 4% rule. You know the engine that runs it, you know the inflation math that sustains it, and you know exactly where the vulnerabilities lie.
You're definitely well armed now.
For sure. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought. Something to just mull over as you look at your own savings and imagine the decades of freedom ahead of you. If the 4% rule assumes your financial life will be a smooth, predictable, inflation-adjusted march for exactly 30 years, well, what happens to your psychological relationship with your money when you wake up on day one of year 31 and you realize that merely surviving means you have technically outlived the math that was supposed to keep you safe?